I was at a high-end corporate gala last month, watching a colleague of mine. Let's call him David. David is what people call the gold standard.
I think I know the type.
Oh, you definitely do. He's the guy who always has the right silk tie, the firmest handshake, and a laugh that sounds like it was tuned at a lab to be perfectly non-threatening. Watching him work the room, it was like watching a master class in the persona.
The perfect performance.
Perfect. He was the capable manager, the visionary leader, the devoted father. His face was set in this permanent, pleasant mask of professional competence. A performance so seamless, it was almost hypnotic. He spent 20 minutes telling me about his balanced life, his meditation routine, and how he hadn't felt a moment of true anger in a decade.
A decade. Yeah. That's a red flag right there.
Exactly. He seemed almost enlightened, a man who had successfully edited out all the messy, petty impulses that plagued the rest of us. He looked deeply satisfied, convinced that this polished public image was the totality of who he actually was. But then, a waiter accidentally brushed against him, spilling a single drop of red wine onto his pristine white cuff. It was a tiny, inconsequential mistake. But in a heartbeat, the visionary leader vanished. David's face contorted into something unrecognizable, a snarl of pure vitriolic rage that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. He didn't just complain. He launched into a tirade that was so disproportionately cruel, it silenced the entire corner of the room. He called the waiter worthless, his eyes wide with a terrifying ancient kind of hate that didn't belong at a cocktail party.
The mask didn't just slip, it shattered.
It shattered. That instantaneous shift from the perfect man to a vessel of blind fury was chilling. It was as if the mask had slipped to reveal a starving animal underneath. 10 seconds later, he caught himself, straightened his sleeve, and tried to smile, but the illusion was dead. We had all seen his shadow, the part of himself he had spent years denying, only for it to grow stronger in the dark.
Wow.
It made me realize how many of us are living a lie, not out of malice, but because we are caught in patterns we don't even see. Carl Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. He identified 6 specific life traps, invisible psychological structures that silently orchestrate our divorces, our failures, and our midlife crises. Most people remain confined by them until the day they die, never realizing they were the ones holding the keys to their own prison.
And that profound anecdote right there that frames the mission of this deep dive perfectly, we are exploring the hidden price of maintaining that polished public image your colleague David had.
The price of the mask.
Exactly. We're moving inward, past that social veneer, to examine the precise psychological architecture Jung mapped out these life traps. And it's important to say this isn't just about individual neuroses,
Yeah, it scales up.
It scales up massively. We're going to look at how these personal dynamics, the persona, the shadow, and especially something called projective identification, move from one person's head into the entire culture of an organization.
Creating conflict, toxicity,
and real-world ethical erosion. So whether you are a senior executive, a team member, or just someone who is deeply curious about what makes people tick, our goal is to help you understand these invisible architects. Because, like Jung said, until they are conscious, they are absolutely directing your fate.
So we're going to give each of these 6 traps the attention they deserve.
We are. Moving from the most external structures, like the persona, to the most internal, hidden forms of psychological confinement.
All right, let's start right where my story began, with the most accessible of these traps. The persona. Okay, so let's really unpack this. Jung defined the persona as the social mask, right? The outward personality we use to navigate the world.
It's the role or the identity you adopt to show you're socially competent. It's the lawyer, the teacher, the capable manager, David. It's what you present to others.
And it's vital to stress that the persona is necessary, not inherently bad. People hear mask and immediately think inauthentic.
Yes, and that's a common misunderstanding. Jung saw it as a functional, even necessary compromise. Think about it. If we showed our total, unedited, authentic selves all the time, our fears, our random desires, our messiness, we couldn't function in a complex society.
Eerie chaos.
Complete chaos. The persona mediates between our internal, private desires and the demands of the social environment. It's like the skin we grow for different situations. It's not a lie, it's an interface.
So it's the most external layer of the ego, essentially helping us adapt. I'm a different person in a professional context than I am at a family gathering.
Precisely. It allows for social predictability and order. So the problem, the actual trap, isn't having a persona. The problem begins with life trap number 1, over-identification.
Okay, so this is where the lines get blurry.
They get erased. The trap closes when you lose the capacity to differentiate between the mask you're wearing and your true self.
When that happens, you start believing the role is you. You're no longer the person playing the manager. You are the manager 24/7.
And the individual turns into a walking performance. They're just following scripts written not by their genuine self, but by the relentless expectations of their professional or social environment.
The psychological cost must be immense.
Think of it as suffocation, the true inner self, the source of creativity, genuine emotion, and spontaneity. It just begins to wither from neglect. Every ounce of energy is dedicated to maintaining the facade.
So you can't spontaneously enjoy a joke or admit a genuine mistake.
No, because that crack in the persona might expose the fragile, neglected self that's hiding underneath. It's terrifying for them.
This sounds exhausting even before we get to the neurobiology of it, but I'm really interested in why we go to such enormous lengths to construct and maintain these masks. It seems like the roots of the persona go deeper than just, professional striving.
Oh, they go much, much deeper. They tie into deep evolutionary mechanisms of social signaling.
Okay, costly signaling theory.
Exactly. When we connect the Jungian persona to evolutionary biology, we are talking about costly signaling. The persona, especially a polished, high-status one, isn't just about looking good. It's about broadcasting your quality in a way that is really difficult for lower-quality competitors to fake.
So, signals evolve to influence how others see us, highlighting desirable qualities. What did those qualities look like historically?
Historically, they were traits necessary for group survival and hierarchy. Physical skill, bravery, good judgment, social dominance, ambition. Things you'd want in a leader or a partner.
And in the modern corporate jungle, that translates to what? Competence, poise, reliability?
Emotional control. The entire premise of costly signaling is that if a signal is expensive to produce, in terms of resources, time, or emotional energy, it becomes an honest signal of quality. A low-quality individual just can't afford the cost, so they can't fake it easily.
It's the psychological equivalent of a peacock's tail. It costs so much energy to grow and maintain that tail that only a genetically healthy male can afford to sustain it. A perfectly maintained, stable professional persona must cost a tremendous amount of energy to sustain in the face of constant stress.
That's a perfect analogy, and we can see this physically. Some studies suggest that a lower voice pitch in men is an honest indicator of male quality because it's intrinsically linked to testosterone levels. That biological link prevents easy faking.
You can't just decide to have a deep voice.
Right. And the high-stakes professional persona tries to do the same thing socially. It signals superior formidability, self-possession, confidence. Maintaining perpetually low levels of arousal, appearing calm and in control during a crisis. That stability itself is the signal. It says, I'm so secure, I don't need to enter a fight or flight state. That's a costly signal to send.
So the moment David snapped over the spilled wine, his persona basically signaled to the whole room that his composure was cheap. It was a fake.
Precisely. And here's the inherent conflict that the research highlights. Signals can be faked because self-interest and conflicts of interest are, ubiquitous in nature and society.
If you can get away with it and the reward is big enough,
you'll favor deception over honesty. The pressure to fake it, to exaggerate poise, to pretend you have knowledge you don't, especially in environments where the rewards are enormous, that becomes a huge psychological burden.
And that pressure to maintain the fraudulent signal brings us right to the core consequence. The neurobiological toll of chronic fraud. This is where the body starts keeping a score that the mind tried to ignore.
Indeed. We came across the incredible story of Elias, a successful Zurich banking consultant. For 2 decades, he mastered the stoic, precise persona. He became the very definition of professional success.
He was the Swiss David.
He was. But the sustained identity masking, the chronic pretense of perfection, took a devastating physical toll. His nervous system registered that sustained performance as psychological fraud.
How does the body differentiate between a functional mask and, fraud?
Because there is a profound mismatch between the truth the inner self knows, the doubts, the fatigue, the anxiety, and the performance the outer self is giving. The body just cannot sustain that level of cognitive dissonance without consequence.
So Elias's stoic mask required his nervous system to constantly suppress genuine emotions.
Constantly. This suppression kept his amygdala, the brain's threat detector, in a state of chronic low-level hypervigilance. He wasn't afraid of a bear in the woods. He was unconsciously fighting the perpetual low-grade fear of being exposed as anything less than perfect.
And that chronic hypervigilance must have just flooded his system with stress hormones like cortisol.
Absolutely. Sustained cortisol release over 2 decades fundamentally changes your neurobiological landscape. Initially, this probably allowed him to appear cool and sharp, enhancing his executive function for short bursts. But eventually, the costs overwhelmed the system. This biological debt manifested when his body began to literally revolt against the psychological pretense.
How? What happened?
He started getting inexplicable tremors during board meetings. Uncontrollable shaking, his body was rebelling.
So the very tool that was meant to ensure his success, the persona, became the engine of his physical breakdown.
The irony is just tragic. In these high-stakes modern professional environments, the persona transforms into a neurobiological cage. Elias's body was demanding an authenticity that his career demanded he lie about. It ultimately threatened the very composure and poise it was designed to project in the first place.
The message is crystal clear, isn't it? You cannot sustainably live a lie without the deepest parts of your system, your biology, eventually forcing an intervention.
It will always catch up to you.
The failure of the persona, as we saw with David, leads us directly to the next psychological structure, the shadow. We witness that pure, terrifying potential for cruelty and rage surface when that drop of wine spilled on his cuff.
And the shadow is defined as the collection of all our repudiated traits. It's the potential for darkness within all of us. The selfishness, the cruelty, the laziness, the dishonesty we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. Life trap number 2 is the denial of the shadow. Jung insisted this was one of the gravest psychological errors a person can make.
Why is denial so dangerous, though? It feels counterintuitive. If I'm striving to be a virtuous person, shouldn't I try to deny and suppress my capacity for, say, selfishness?
Because denial doesn't make the shadow disappear, it just pushes it out of the ego's territory and makes it unconscious. It becomes an autonomous, highly energetic, and powerful force that grows in the dark, completely outside your conscious control.
So it's still there, just invisible to you.
And getting stronger. When the shadow is integrated, you gain true power over that potential darkness because you acknowledge it. You can say, I know I could be cruel, but I choose not to be. The unintegrated, denied shadow is a time bomb that compels you to act out its contents without understanding why. David didn't know why he had so much rage.
And when we are unwilling to look at that mess inside ourselves, we inevitably resort to externalizing it, which brings us to life trap number 3. Unconscious projection. This is where the internal conflict starts to contaminate our external relationships.
Projection is the initial psychological defense. You take the unwanted aspects of yourself, the flaws, the insecurities, and you place them onto other people. It's a mental trick to keep your own self-image intact. It's a form of internal psychological housekeeping.
The dishonest person who trusts no one because they assume everyone lies.
Or the perpetually anxious person who perceives hostility everywhere they go.
So it turns every relationship into a hall of mirrors. You stop seeing the real person and start interacting with a screen for your own internal movie, constantly fighting the rejected parts of yourself.
And in organizational dynamics, this process becomes systematized and far more destructive through a mechanism known as projective identification, or PI.
Okay, so this is a step beyond simple projection.
A huge step. Projection is passive. You just see your flaw in them. Projective identification is active. It's the unconscious projection of unwanted parts of yourself into others, specifically used to bolster a conscious self-view that is concordant with their high-stakes role requirements.
Okay, break that down for me. So if a leader must be seen as perfectly moral, they don't just think a subordinate is corrupt. They unconsciously act in a way that forces the subordinate to embody that projected corruption.
Precisely. The leader unconsciously relieves their own inner conflict by directing their powerful dislike of their unwanted self, the imperfect, morally questionable part of their own past, toward a target. The target is then subtly manipulated through behavior, expectation, or denigration to internalize and often actually enact those projected qualities. The recipient starts feeling and acting like the very thing the leader disowns in themselves.
That sounds intensely powerful and really insidious, especially in visible, high-stakes leadership roles.
It is the price of leadership, as some researchers call it. High visibility creates intense pressure to embody an idealized identity, the wanted self, which is impeccable and unflappable. This pressure dramatically increases the likelihood that leaders will resort to PI to keep the unwanted self at bay.
Whether that unwanted self is a history of ethical flaws, personal failures, or just a lack of competence.
All of the above. And we see this pathology illustrated so dramatically in the case study of the Gucci family business.
Let's focus on Aldo Gucci. He oversaw the firm's global expansion. His entire success was built on an image, yet his actual conduct was anything but noble.
Aldo was a profound identity crafter, a master of the persona. He successfully presented a deeply aristocratic image. They called him l'imperator, the emperor, and he cultivated this image of high moral authority and impeccable taste.
That image of purity was essential to the luxury brand he was building.
It was the brand. But the reality was messy and deeply contradictory.
How so?
Well, for one, his family had poor common origins, which he desperately tried to erase by projecting this air of nobility. But more critically, his public moral authority clashed directly with his business conduct. Under Aldo's leadership, the company was systematically siphoning millions of dollars in taxable revenues to offshore companies through false invoicing.
So, massive fraud.
Systemic, massive fraud running through every level of the organization.
So he was living with this deeply conflicting internal history. The reality of being a common-born criminal threatened the highly valued aristocratic moral leader persona. How did he manage to maintain that perfect image for so long?
He sustained the noble identity by projecting those unwanted selves, the nobody, the common, and especially the criminal, onto close, highly visible family members. Projection requires proximity, you see.
You have to have a target nearby.
You do. He publicly labeled his first son, Giorgio, the black sheep, constantly denigrating him. And when the U.S. Internal Revenue Service began investigating his own massive fraud, Aldo simultaneously initiated this campaign of projection, accusing his nephew Maurizio of illegal financial activities. He even sent documents to Italian authorities claiming Maurizio had illegally financed a yacht.
Wow, so he was literally attacking the projected parts of himself in others. By constantly finding and attacking the criminal and common in his family, he could credibly deny those same aspects in himself and continue to enact his idealized imperial identity.
That's the twisted psychological logic. But this dynamic became toxic and ultimately destructive through what's called the return dynamic.
The projection comes back.
It comes back with a vengeance. Aldo's projections, the sustained denigration and accusations, were intolerable for his son Paolo. Paolo, feeling burdened by the label of black sheep and the internal shame of this projected criminal identity, he couldn't just integrate it or contain it. So he responded by dedicating a decade of his life to relentlessly exposing his father's corruption.
Paolo was fighting back, literally returning the despised criminal identity back to its source.
It transformed an inner psychological conflict into relentless interpersonal warfare. It cost millions in legal fees and consumed the family's energy for years. Paolo ultimately provided the evidence of tax evasion that led to Aldo's eventual jail term at age 82.
That's incredible. And this whole saga, it illustrates the ultimate consequence of projective identification in organizations. It creates what you call the compulsive tie.
Exactly. The leader feels they must remain in proximity to their denigrated counterparts, the people who embody their projected flaws, so they can continue to deny, control, and attack those unwanted selves lodged in others.
So it's not as simple as just cutting the connection and firing the family member, is it?
It's paradoxically impossible, psychologically impossible, because the defense depends on the projection being housed somewhere external and controllable. If Aldo had simply fired Paolo and severed contact, that criminal self would have been forced back into his own consciousness, threatening his carefully crafted image.
He needed Paolo nearby to serve as the living, breathing container for the rejected aspect of his soul.
He did. And that need for proximity, combined with the cycle of returning projections, led directly to the spiraling toxicity and the financial collapse of the Gucci family structure. The psychological need for self-defense superseded any sound business governance.
And that toxic, cyclical pattern doesn't just stay confined to the executive suite, does it? It must contaminate the entire organizational culture through what's called shadow contagion.
That's right. When PI becomes the collective way of operating, it impacts every layer. We see this reflected powerfully in studies analyzing the relationship between the dark triad traits.
Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy.
Right. In leadership, which they call LDT, and in employees, or EDT.
And this research completely challenges the idea that toxicity is purely a unilateral, top-down thing.
It completely upends it. The research in institutional settings confirmed a highly significant, moderately strong, positive correlation of 0.607 between LDT and EDT traits. This demonstrates a mutual reinforcement across the hierarchy.
So the dark behaviors aren't just mandated from above, they're cyclically reinforced. It creates a self-sustaining ecosystem of ethical erosion.
A perfect way to put it.
So how does that psychic transference happen? How do these dark traits jump from person to person within the staff?
The research identifies 3 key psychological and behavioral mechanisms. First, you have toxic role modeling, where employees observe and consciously emulate unethical behavior because it appears to be successful.
The boss does it and gets promoted, so I should too.
Exactly. Second, you have defensive imitation, which is crucial in high-pressure environments. This is where employees mimic their leaders' dark behaviors, strategic manipulation, emotional coldness, simply to survive or advance in a highly political setting.
So mimicking the boss's Machiavellianism isn't aspirational, it's an act of psychological survival.
It's pure defense. And the third mechanism is shadow projection, where employees rationalize their own flaws, say their own laziness or deception, by referencing the leader's more extreme negative behavior. They think, if the CEO is siphoning money, my small corner cutting is irrelevant. This creates a collective ethical drift.
And the study found that one trait was particularly contagious.
Yes. Machiavellianism calculated deception was the most reciprocally influential trait, which just confirms that these dark behaviors are cyclical and become deeply normalized in a culture.
We have a powerful story that captures exactly how this projection is used to manage organizational failure, turning one person into the scapegoat for a collective shadow.
I encountered this case in my research on organizational trauma. It was a tech firm in San Francisco that had just suffered a catastrophic product failure due to critical tactical errors at the leadership level. The CEO, who is deeply identified with the hero archetype, found herself incapable of processing the shame and failure.
So her persona was under threat.
Massively. And the defense mechanism of shadow projection took over immediately. Instead of owning the failure, she began to subtly signal that the catastrophe was due to the lack of grit in a specific junior manager named Marcus.
Marcus became the container.
He did. Within a few weeks, the entire department, subconsciously relieved that the blame wasn't falling on their own shared anxiety or incompetence, they all aligned with the CEO's narrative. Marcus became the collective scapegoat, the vessel for everyone's repressed anxiety, lack of effort, and systemic incompetence.
So the projection offered the team this powerful shared psychological relief.
A huge relief. It wasn't a systemic failure, it was a character flaw in Marcus.
That scapegoating mechanism is obviously tragic for the victim, for Marcus, but it also prevents the organization from ever truly learning, doesn't it?
It's the ultimate circuit breaker. Instead of the leader accepting the current of failure, they use projection to overload Marcus. The victim becomes the embodiment of the collective shadow, protecting the department's idealized self-image of competence. The problem is moved, not solved. Systemic errors are left unaddressed, guaranteeing the same tactical failures will occur again because the leader and the organization refuse to look in the mirror.
When leadership refuses to own their shadow, the group finds a victim to burn.
And a culture built on projection is a culture destined for rot and fragility.
The first 3 traps revolve around how we deal with the external world, our mask, and how we relate to others through projection. But now we need to go deeper, into the traps that ensnare the self internally, the ones that block the path to what Jung called individuation. Let's start with life trap 5, identification with archetypes.
Archetypes are these primal energies, the hero, the sage, the victim, the mother, the warrior, that reside in what Jung called the collective unconscious. They are the universal, necessary human patterns of energy.
So they're not bad in themselves.
Not at all. They're essential. The trap is set when an individual identifies with one of them permanently, confusing a temporary energy with their entire identity, rather than just connecting with that energy when the situation demands it.
So instead of simply acting heroically in a moment of crisis, you try to become the hero permanently. You force every decision, every relationship, every emotion to conform to that rigid, singular role.
Exactly. The mature mind sustains a dynamic relationship with these patterns. It utilizes the energies as required. If you need to fight for a cause, you connect with the warrior. If you need to teach, you connect with the sage. The immature or insecure mind becomes possessed by a single archetype, flattening their complex, authentic self into a one-dimensional caricature.
And this is a profound trap because it feels empowering, doesn't it?
It feels fantastic, but it is ultimately a diminishment of the soul.
And this trap has taken on a particularly potent modern form in the digital era.
Oh, the digital crisis exacerbates this identification tremendously.
Yeah.
We have the story of Leo, a young creator, which just perfectly captures this. Imagine Leo living under the relentless gaze and feedback loops of social media algorithms. The algorithm doesn't reward the complex, messy, contradictory process of being a whole human.
No, it rewards consistency. It rewards the stoic mentor, the rebel, or the guru.
That's right. It's a coercion towards simplification. Leo was achieving massive professional success, but he began to believe he was the stoic mentor his followers celebrated. He stopped experiencing genuine spontaneity, frustration, or even inappropriate humor.
Every single genuine emotion was filtered.
Filtered through the lens of what would fit his persona, what would trend, he had traded his complex, unique path of individuation for a pre-packaged digital archetype.
The consequences must go deeper than just posturing online. What did Leo specifically lose?
He lost his genuine internal compass. When faced with an unflattering comment, the real Leo might feel hurt or lash out, but the stoic mentor must respond with measured, calm wisdom. The effort to maintain this performance meant he lost his ability to cope with authentic, contradictory, or complex emotions. His internal life was being dictated by external, commercial code.
And unlike face-to-face interactions where the mask can kind of dissipate when you leave the room, the digital environment is persistent.
Yes, the profiles we curate exist in high fidelity. They are fixed and retrievable. This persistence pressures the individual to maintain absolute algorithmic consistency. If you present yourself as the stoic mentor one day and then show genuine emotional vulnerability the next, you disrupt the algorithm and confuse your audience.
So the digital pressure actively promotes a one-dimensional self.
It does. It makes the complex, messy path toward a whole self, the path of individuation, an act of rebellion. Achieving cognitive autonomy today isn't just about self-help. It's about fighting back against an algorithmic desire to flatten your soul into a searchable tag.
Let's transition now to Life Trap 4, psychological inflation. This is one of the most seductive traps because it feels like a spiritual or intellectual upgrade.
It is extremely perilous precisely because it feels so empowering. Inflation occurs when the small ego attempts to hold on to energies that rightly belong to the collective unconscious. This could be a feeling of profound religious insight, a sudden revolutionary business idea, or a rush of creative genius.
So they have a moment of genuine connection to a massive archetypal energy.
And suddenly they believe they are special, chosen, or enlightened.
But wait, if they have a genuine moment of profound insight, why is claiming ownership of it a step backward?
Because the psychology of inflation is fundamentally a retreat in consciousness. The small ego hasn't transcended itself. It has been engulfed or possessed by archetypal forces that are too big for it to handle. Think of the myth of Icarus. He flew too close to the sun, intoxicated by the power of flight. That feeling of being chosen is the same intoxication. The person loses their grounding.
How does that manifest, say, professionally?
It manifests as poor risk assessment and arrogance. Think of the new MBA graduate who believes their spreadsheet model can immediately solve a 50-year-old company's institutional problems, dismissing all past knowledge. Or the political pundit who feels they possess a unique, sacred insight into the country's soul and therefore becomes immune to criticism or facts.
So inflation leads the individual to feel immune to failure and reality.
Exactly. The cult leader, the therapist who crosses ethical lines because they believe they are uniquely equipped to help clients, all are victims of inflation.
It sounds like an enormous surge of ego contaminating a small amount of real insight.
It is the ultimate expression of the ego's grandiosity. Jung taught that the antidote is radical humility. Authentic psychological advancement necessitates what he called heightened ordinariness rather than seeking distinctiveness. The truly wise person does not need to advertise their wisdom, they simply express it through their grounded actions.
So if you feel special, chosen, or consistently better than others because of your insights, Jung would suggest you are firmly in the grip of inflation and you need to come back to earth. The tragedy is that the person often burns out. The ego simply cannot sustain the energy of the archetype and collapses into despair or narcissism. Finally, let's address the last major psychological snare, Life Trap 6, psychic rigidity. This is where consciousness itself becomes fixed and brittle.
Psychic rigidity is the hardening of consciousness into fixed patterns, beliefs, and defenses. It is the inability to accept paradox, to tolerate ambiguity, or to genuinely consider alternative points of view.
That often presents externally as strength, though, right? As conviction or high principle.
Which makes it incredibly difficult for the individual to identify as a pathology. But it is fundamentally a massive psychological liability. It's the opposite of adaptability.
It is the defining liability of the modern era.
I think so. The rigid thinker has built a fortress of certainty and will protect it at all costs, even if it means losing opportunities, alienating others, or inviting catastrophe. Hume noted that rigidity frequently arises as a defense mechanism against anxiety and disorder. When the world feels chaotic, the mind desperately seeks safety in hard and fast rules, ideological purity, and absolute beliefs.
So rigidity isn't strength, it's chronic anxiety disguised as certainty.
Exactly. And the consequence, in a world that demands constant change, is catastrophic. The rigid person or the rigid organization cannot learn or innovate. They can only break. Think of a massive corporation that pioneered an industry like an analog photography giant whose rigid internal culture refused to embrace digital technology because that's not how we do things?
They had a fixed belief system in film and retail stores that they defended long after the market had moved on.
And the leader who is psychologically rigid cannot tolerate the ambiguity required to pivot. The culture becomes stuck. That inability to tolerate ambiguity is the very definition of the crisis. Rigid systems, psychological or corporate, can't integrate novelty. They just break down when complexity increases.
So what's the solution Jung offered?
The solution he offered to counteract this rigidity was the transcendent function, which he saw as the highest form of psychological maturity.
We've used that term, but we need to give it more depth. What does the transcendent function do in practice?
In practice, it is the ability to hold opposites in tension and tolerate perpetual transformation. It is not about resolving a conflict like, okay, I will choose one answer. It is about sustaining the tension between contradictory ideas. For instance, I am an excellent manager and I possess a capacity for massive incompetence.
So holding both of those truths at the same time.
Yes. By sustaining the tension between two opposites, the psyche can spontaneously generate a third, novel insight, a third way that was previously unavailable.
So instead of being rigid and choosing A or B, the mature mind holds A and B in tension and creates a new thing, C.
C is the transcendent function at work. It is the ability to maintain cognitive and emotional flexibility. The mature mind is constantly changing, open to paradox, and humble enough to realize that no single principle can capture the complexity of reality. That openness to perpetual change is the strongest possible form of psychological strength.
It sounds like the ultimate defense against all 6 of these traps.
Yeah.
Recognizing that you are never fully the persona, never separate from the shadow, never perfectly enlightened like with inflation, and never absolutely certain which is rigidity.
That's the entire path. The 6 traps are all variations of the ego confusing itself with the totality of reality. They are ways the unconscious manipulates the ego into building its own prison through denial, grandiosity, or rigidity.
We've covered the 6 invisible architects of fate. The persona, the shadow, projective identification, identification with archetypes, inflation, and psychic rigidity.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a sobering realization that, as Jung believed, so much of human suffering, the professional failures, the intense organizational conflicts, the private crises, are self-inflicted, orchestrated by these unconscious patterns.
They really are. And the path of individuation, that journey towards psychological freedom, it just requires brutal honesty. It demands seeing the persona as a necessary tool for navigation, not an identity to inhabit. And it demands owning the rejected, messy parts of the shadow rather than projecting them onto a scapegoat. The conflicts we see raging in the external world, whether it's in our leaders or institutions or even our own families, are profoundly reflective of the unresolved conflicts within the self. Psychological freedom begins the moment you realize you have built your own prison by denying your flaws and projecting them onto the world, and that you already hold the keys to liberation.